Welcome to Africa Untold, the place where the true stories of this continent finally find their voice. Imagine if the history we were taught in schools told us about Africa's warrior queens, rulers who led armies, and women who built empires. Imagine a world where Queen Amina stood beside Alexander the Great in history books, where Queen Makeda was celebrated alongside Solomon, and where Jasantiwa was remembered like Joan of Arc. But that world never existed in the textbooks. Their names were silenced, their power buried, their stories left untold. Today, we uncover them, from Amina of Zazzau to Makeda, Queen of Sheba, to the hidden queens whose courage shook kingdoms. This is not just history, this is resurrection. This is African Queens, Part 2, Amina Makeda, and the Untold Legends. In the dusty plains of 16th century northern Nigeria, within the royal palace of Zazzau, a child was born. Her name was Amina. Unlike other princesses who grew up in silken halls, surrounded by songs and perfumes, Amina's heart beat to a different rhythm. She was drawn not to embroidery or jewels, but to the clash of steel, the thundering hooves of horses, and the roar of warriors returning from battle. As a little girl, she would sneak into the training grounds, watching the soldiers sharpen their spears, dreaming not of ruling from behind curtains, but of riding into battle herself. By the time she was a teenager, Amina was no ordinary princess. She had already begun commanding troops, her presence fierce enough to inspire men twice her age. She fought, trained, and led with such skill that even seasoned warriors bowed to her authority. Then, in her mid-30s, fate crowned her Queen of Zazzau. But Amina was not content with merely ruling a city. She dreamed bigger. She wanted an empire. For 34 years, she led campaign after campaign, riding at the head of her army, expanding Zazzau's influence across the savannah. Kingdoms that once dismissed her as just a woman fell to her strategy and courage, and she did not only conquer with the sword. Amina was a builder. She ordered the construction of massive fortifications, known as aminas. Walls, defensive structures, so strong that fragments of them still stand centuries later, protecting towns long after her death. Her reign transformed Zazzau into a powerhouse of trade, culture, and military strength. She became a legend, her name etched into history and preserved in the songs of her people. To this day, Nigerians say, Amina, daughter of Nik, a woman as capable as a man. But here lies the truth. Amina was not as capable as a man. She was more. She was a queen who fought like a warrior, ruled like a king, and built a legacy that outlived empires. Nearly 3,000 years ago, across the shimmering waters of the Red Sea, there was a land called Sheba, a kingdom famed for its gold, incense, and precious stones. And at its heart ruled a woman whose name would echo through scripture, legend, and history. Makeda, the Queen of Sheba. Sheba was no ordinary kingdom, and Makeda was no ordinary queen. Traders from across Arabia and Africa came to her markets, their caravans heavy with treasures. Through her hands flowed the riches of the ancient world. Her fame spread so widely that even the Bible speaks of her. It tells how she traveled to meet the wise King Solomon, testing him with riddles, and leaving impressed by his wisdom in the Quran. She is remembered as a queen who embraced truth and understanding, ruling with grace and intelligence. And in Ethiopia, her story became even greater. Chronicles say that she bore a son, Mentilikai, who would journey back to his mother's homeland and become the first emperor of a dynasty so enduring that it would stretch all the way into the 20th century, a line of kings claiming descent not just from Makeda, but from Solomon himself. But here's what we must remember. Makeda did not need Solomon for her greatness. Her power came from Sheba, a kingdom she ruled with vision, strength, and wealth drawn from the trade routes she commanded. She was already a queen before Solomon, and she remained one long after. Makeda was not just a monarch. She was the mother of a nation, the root of a dynasty. and a symbol of Africa's role in shaping the wider world. Her story reminds us that Africa was never silent, never hidden. It stood at the crossroads of history, shaping empires and faiths alike. The year was 25 BCE. The Roman Empire had just swallowed Egypt, and their armies, hardened and proud, looked further south. To them, Nubia, the kingdom of Kush, would be just another jewel to pluck, another land to conquer. But Rome had not counted on Queen Amanirenas. She was no ruler who hid behind palace walls. She was a warrior, a mother, and a leader. When the Romans marched forward, she rose to meet them, not from afar, but on the battlefield itself. In the heat of war, she lost an eye, but even half-blinded, she did not retreat. With fire in her heart and spear in her hand, she pressed forward, leading her people with unmatched resolve. Her army struck the Romans with fury. They destroyed garrisons, burned outposts, and in an act that humiliated the empire, they seized statues of Caesar Augustus himself, carrying them back to Kush as trophies of resistance. Rome, the empire that bowed nations, found itself at a standstill. For years, the fighting dragged on, but it was not the Kushites who bent. In the end, it was Rome that sought peace, and the treaty that followed was signed on Kushite terms, something almost unthinkable in the ancient world. Amanirenas, the one-eyed queen, had done the impossible. She had faced the world's greatest empire and emerged unbroken. Her story is not just one of war. It is proof that Africa was never silent, that its queens could stand eye to eye with the Caesars of Rome and win. Jayasantua, the mother of Ghana's resistance. The year was 1900. In the heart of West Africa, the British tightened their grip on the Ashanti kingdom. They demanded something unthinkable, the Golden Stool. But the Golden Stool was no ordinary throne. It was the sacred soul of the Ashanti people, said to hold the very spirit of the nation. To touch it was to touch their identity, their pride, their destiny. The Ashanti men gathered, but hesitation filled the room. The British were powerful, armed with rifles and cannons. Fear crept in. Then, a woman rose. Her name was Jaasa. She was not a warrior by birth, but a queen mother by duty. Yet in that moment, she became the voice of her people. With fire in her eyes, she declared, "If you, the men of Ashanti, will not go forward, then we, the women, will. We will fight the white men until the last of us falls." Her words cracked through fear like thunder. Inspired, the Ashanti rallied behind her, and so began the War of the Golden Stool, the last great war of resistance in Ghana. Asantioa, lead with unshakable courage, defying one of the world's greatest empires. The British eventually captured her and sent her into exile, but exile could not erase her spirit. Her name became eternal, her defiance immortal. Today, in Ghana, she is remembered not just as a queen mother, but as the mother of resistance, proof that courage can rise from the least expected place, and that even in the face of empire, one woman's voice can move a nation. The 1600s. On the shores of Central Africa, a storm was rising. The Portuguese had come, hungry for land, slaves, and power. Kingdom after kingdom bent beneath their weight. But in Ndongo and Mata, one woman stood in their path, Queen Zinga Mbandi. And Zinga was not only a warrior, she was a strategist, a diplomat, and a master of pride. When the Portuguese tried to belittle her during peace talks, refusing to offer her a chair, she refused to kneel. Instead, she motioned to one of her servants, who dropped 2 hands and knees, and Zinga sat upon his back, her head high, her dignity unshaken. That moment was more than symbolism. It was a message. You will not lower me. I am your equal. But Nzinga's brilliance went beyond words. She forged alliances, trained her people in guerrilla warfare, and struck the Portuguese where they least expected. For more than 30 years, she fought not just with weapons, but with cunning. When enemies thought her beaten, she returned with new strategies. When allies wavered, she bound them with promises and vision. She outmaneuvered one of Europe's most powerful empires and kept her kingdom alive. Nzinga's legacy is not just in her victories, but in her unyielding spirit. She proved that resistance is not only fought with the sword, it is fought with intelligence, with pride, and with a will that refuses to bend. To this day, she stands as a symbol of African resilience, a queen who never bowed. Ask the world about African queens, and one name almost always comes first. Cleopatra. Yes, Cleopatra was powerful. Yes, she ruled Egypt at a time of great turmoil. But she was only one queen, and not even fully African in ancestry. So why is she the only name most people know? Because for centuries, colonial historians chose her as the acceptable queen to highlight. By celebrating Cleopatra and erasing others, they shrank Africa's story into one woman and left out the dozens whose roots ran deeper into Africa's soil. But here's the truth. Africa is full of Cleopatras, queens like Amina of Zazzau, who turned Nigeria into a military powerhouse. Makeda of Sheba, whose dynasty shaped Ethiopia for centuries. And Nzinga of Angola, who outwitted the Portuguese for over 30 years. Amanirenas of Kush, who humbled the might of Rome. Asantewa of Ghana, who stood against the British with nothing but courage and fire. These women were every bit as powerful, brilliant, and inspiring as Cleopatra, and many of them fought not for lovers or dynasties, but for the survival and dignity of their people. Africa's story was never about one queen, it was about many, and now their names are rising again, demanding their place in history, beside Cleopatra, or even above her. When we think of queens, we imagine crowns, thrones, and armies marching into battle. But in Africa, queens were more than rulers of land, they were keepers of the soul. In Ethiopia, it was often women who preserved the ancient traditions of Christianity. They were guardians of faith, ensuring that rituals and scriptures survived through centuries of turmoil. In the Yoruba lands of West Africa, the power of queens was not measured in swords, but in spirit. Priestesses held immense influence, standing as bridges between the divine and the people. Through them, kings sought guidance. Through them, communities found balance. And in Nubia, queens were not buried only with treasures of gold, but with sacred artifacts, symbols that they were more than monarchs. They were protectors of religion, of culture, of the unseen powers that bound their people together. These women remind us that leadership was not only about conquering kingdoms. It was about guiding civilizations, guarding identity, preserving faith, and keeping alive the flame of the African soul. They were not just queens of nations. They were mothers of civilization. The question remains, why are these names missing from textbooks? Because colonial historians needed Africa to appear empty of greatness. Because patriarchy wanted women erased from leadership. Because power fears truth. But erasing does not destroy. The stories survived in songs, oral traditions, and the memory of the people, and now they rise again. Today, we speak their names: Amina, Makeda, Amanirenas, Asantewa, and Nzinga, and countless others whose thrones were never forgotten, only hidden. Their power was real, their legacy eternal, and you, watching this, are part of their return. By learning, by sharing, by honoring, you are keeping their crowns alive. Because Africa's queens never disappeared. They were waiting for us to remember. This has been Africa Untold, where the stories erased by history are reborn. If this journey opened your eyes, do not let it end here. Like, share, and subscribe, so the world can hear what it was never meant to hear. Because history is not written only in books. It is written in blood, in stone, in memory. And today, it is written again, by us. Africa's past is not lost. It is untold.